It's been a bit of a rocky road for Pokemon on Switch, but despite the bumpy journey, the series has still managed to achieve over 100 million unit sales on this console, which is truly nuts. We have had some of the best games in the series on Switch, but also some of the worst. So I thought it would be fun to rank all 14 Pokemon games on Switch from worst to best, so we can determine which Pokemon games you should be playing on the Switch. There's going to be some controversial placements, lots of spicy hot takes, and I'm probably going to piss off lots of Pokemon fans. But this is going to be a fun list to go through. So let's go and kick off this list with what I think is the worst Pokemon game on Switch. And I think it's a game that most people would have forgotten about. Pokémon Quest. This is essentially an idle-based free-to-play mobile game where you don't actually do anything. Pokemon automatically move around until they encounter a wild Pokemon to battle, they begin auto-attacking, and all you can do is occasionally press on the cooldown buttons to unleash special attacks. That's it. And if you find that to be too overwhelming, you can press the auto button to make those special attacks automated too. So this ends up being a game where you don't actually do anything. Okay, that's a bit of an over-exaggeration, as between levels, there are some micromanaging elements in the game where you will be cooking meals to level up and attract new Pokemon to come to your base. Pokemon also gain XP and level up after battles, and unlock new skills you can assign to them, but the core gameplay is still completely automated. And because this is a free-to-play mobile game, this game can get incredibly grindy, unless if you are willing to waste away your money on microtransactions to speed things up. Please don't do this. Pokemon Quest essentially just serves as a time waster, and it's not worth investing into. Pokémon Friends. This is one of the newer Pokemon spin-offs to hit the Switch, but I have never heard anyone talk about this one. I almost forgot to include this game on the list because of that. Pokémon Friends is another mobile style game featuring a collection of simple puzzle style minigames. Completing puzzles will reward you with yarn that you can use to get random collectible Pokemon plushies. Emphasis on the word random. Of course my voice decided to break as I said that. Different types of yarn allows you to get different Pokemon types, but you can't choose specifically what Pokemon plushies you want. That's left to random chance. To be fair, it's not the most punishing gacha game out there, but there are other problems that stop this from being a game worth trying out. Puzzles are fun to play at first, but are incredibly simple and grows stale quickly. The game also feels very overpriced for what it is. The base game is only £8, which I think is reasonable, but if you want to experience all the content Pokemon Friends has to offer, you will need to buy the game with the 2 additional puzzle packs, which will set you back by £35. That is a lot of money for what is essentially a premium mobile game. I would recommend avoiding this one. Pokemon Cafe Remix. On to now our third mobile game on the list, but don't worry, this one is leagues above the previous 2 games we have talked about already. This is however something you have probably already played before, as it's one of those generic mobile game puzzlers where you link together icons, chaining together combos to rack up tons of points. It's addicting, but the core gameplay loop can be found in thousands of other mobile games. Where Pokemon Cafe Remix differentiates itself, however, is that it has an adorably charming art style and setting. The cafe you run has a cozy, jolly atmosphere to it, and all the Pokemon you can unlock are all really cute, and some of the dishes you make in this game look incredibly tasty. I wish I could eat all of them in real life. The only negatives here are the typical tropes seen in other free-to-play mobile games, like microtransactions. Apart from that though, this is still a sweet puzzle game that serves as a nice little distraction for a bit. Pokemon Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl. The first mainline games to make it onto the list, and I find these Gen 4 remakes to be incredibly disappointing. I was initially very excited for these Gen 4 remakes, as the original Pokemon Diamond for the DS was the very first Pokemon game I played, and I never managed to finish it. Previous remakes of Pokemon games have also been handled incredibly well by Game Freak. Heart Gold and Heart Silver are well beloved by many, and I really love of the Gen 3 remakes, Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. For these Gen 4 remakes, however, Game Freak handed over the project to another game dev studio called Ilka, and that was a big mistake. Aside from the new Grand Underground area and some improvements to the game's pacing, there is a lack of new features and quality of life improvements to these remakes. No platinum content has been added to these remakes, Pokemon can only be found through random encounters for the majority of the game, and while the new art style keeps the chibi look of the original, I think the pixelated look of the original games actually looks a lot nicer than the art done for this new remake. It's a disappointing affair all around. These remakes don't do the original games justice. If you've never experienced Gen 4 Pokemon before, then you could still have a good time with these games, but even the DS originals are better than these remakes. Pokémon Unite. I'm going to be completely honest, this is not my type of game. I've tried to play other MOBAs like League of Legends before, and I've never had any fun with these types of games. I do think that Pokémon Unite, however, is a pretty solid MOBA for people into that genre. The gameplay is engaging, there's a good selection of Pokemon to play, and winning matches feels rewarding. It's free to play, but there's a disgusting amount of in-game purchases here, and quite often, the game likes to throw them right up in your face. You have been warned if you want to try this one out.
The name's Pikachu, and I'm what you might call a great detective.
Detective Pikachu Returns is the long-awaited sequel to Detective Pikachu on 3DS. It was heavily rumoured for a while that we would be getting a second Detective Pikachu game, and that's what we got in 2023. I can't sit here and say that Returns is a better game than the original, but the game still does a lot of things right. There's a lot of Pokemon to meet, there's tons of silly humour in here, and the detective coffee drinking obsessed Pikachu is the star of the show here. He never fails to make you raise a smile on your face. My main criticism is that the sequel feels like it's been dumbed down a lot for a younger audience. The original game was aimed for young kids as well, but the sequel has a story and gameplay that are incredibly simple compared to the original. It's a bit of a shame as the original game can be enjoyed by both kids and adults, but it's more difficult for adults to enjoy this sequel. Gameplay can also become quite repetitive, and the graphics are not the best they could be either. You can still enjoy Detective Pikachu Returns if you can get past these things, and if you are looking for a more laid-back, chilled Pokemon adventure. And if you are a parent, then it's the perfect Pokemon game to enjoy with your kids. Pokemon Mystery Dungeon DX. I'm actually very surprised we have only had one of these games on the Switch so far, as this is one of Pokemon's biggest spin-off series. This Mystery Dungeon is also a remake of the first game in that dungeon crawling spin-off series, so it's not an original game, but my god, I love the art style here. There's a lot of Pokemon games that look like dog on the Switch, but this is not one of those games. It's a shame that the rest of the game sucks though. Okay, that was a joke. The game isn't bad at all. This is, however, a remake of quite an old dungeon crawler, and the gameplay here feels quite simplistic compared to other more modern dungeon crawlers. It will only take a couple of hours before the gameplay starts to get pretty repetitive, and most people are probably going to get bored and bounce off this game quite quickly. If you can get into it though, it's pretty fun, and there's potentially hundreds of hours of gameplay here for you. I'm still personally hoping that we get an entirely brand new Mystery Dungeon game in the future. Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, the first mainline Pokemon games on Switch. These were a reimagining of the classic Gen 1 games taking place in the Kanto region, with a couple of twists. The biggest one being that catching Pokemon works like it does in Pokemon Go, where you don't actually battle the Pokemon, you just go straight to catching them. Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee were pretty controversial when they first came out. With them being the first mainline games to release on Switch, they weren't exactly what everyone wanted at the time, and I think lots of people were disappointed that it seemed like this was the direction Pokemon was going in moving forward. However, now when you look back at these games retrospectively, you can appreciate all the cool things they do. Overworld encounters were first introduced here, and they have been a mainstay in the series ever since. Every Pokemon in the game can either follow follow you or you can ride on them. Later games only let you ride specific Pokemon, so it was really cool to have here. It's surprisingly the best looking mainline Pokemon game on Switch. It all went downhill after that. The entire game can be played in local co-op, which is a really fun way to experience Generation 1, and the whole soundtrack is fully orchestrated. It's the only Pokemon game that has this, and I can't believe they haven't done it again for the other mainline games that came after this. There's a lot of good in Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee. They stand out and have their own identity on Switch, and they are definitely games I would consider revisiting. Pokémon Scarlet and Violet. These were the hardest games to rank on this list, as you either love Scarlet and Violet or you hate them. Let's get the obvious out of the way first. Visuals look ugly. The open world feels bland and empty, and performance is all over the place. I remember first playing Violet, and this was my first experience catching a wild Pokemon. I couldn't believe that Game Freak had the balls to release a Pokemon in a state like this. It was honestly shocking. Thankfully, performance has gotten better with time, with updates and patches, especially if you play the games on Switch 2, where the games actually run surprisingly smoothly. But visuals and textures still look awful, and you get a ton of pop-in when roaming around the world. Despite all these issues, however, I still managed to have some fun with Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. These are the first fully open world Pokemon games, and while I said earlier that the world feels incredibly bland, it's still fun to explore to find new areas, battle trainers, and catch new Pokemon. Speaking of new Pokemon, the new Generation 9 Pokemon I think have some of the strongest designs we have seen for a while in the Pokemon series. It's hard to pick my favourites as I love all of them. The story is also one of the strongest in the entire series. It takes a while to ramp up, but it can get really good in the end game. You can tackle the main objectives in any order you like. No other Pokemon game gives you this amount of freedom, and the soundtrack is stacked with so many bangers. Every mainline Pokemon game has a fantastic soundtrack, but it's especially good in Scarlet and Violet. It's clear that Game Freak's tech has not evolved along with the ambition of their Pokemon games. But if you can look past all the glaring issues, then Scarlet and Violet could become your favourite mainline Pokemon games in the series. Pokkén Tournament DX. In my opinion, one of the most underrated Pokemon games on Switch. This is a Pokemon fighting game in the style of other games like Street Fighter and Tekken. You face off against opponents in 1v1 battles with rock, paper, scissors style combat. You will also be shifting between two different fighting styles, 3D and 2D fighting. There's 25 Pokemon fighters to choose from, and each one has a wide range of moves they can perform, and they each have a different fighting style. Some Pokemon are gifted in power or speed, while others are classified as technical characters. There's also secondary attacks and buffs to think about while fighting, and also special moves can be very useful for making a comeback in a fight. The only downside of this game is that the single player content is a bit weak, but if you primarily play this as a multiplayer game with friends locally or random people online, then you can have a lot of fun with Pokkén Tournament. There's quite a lot of depth here in this fighting game, and this is a unique Pokemon spin-off that feels great to play. Pokémon Sword and Shield. Do you remember the amount of hate these games got when they first came out, and how everyone was obsessed with looking at these poor quality trees? I mean, yeah, they do look pretty bad, but these games got way more hate than they deserved. Sword and Shield may not be perfect, but they are pretty solid overall. These games sit as a middle ground between classic and the new style of Pokemon. We have both random and overworld encounters, and you also travel across classic style routes you see in the older Pokemon games, but also a new wild area, which is a big open space you can roam around in and catch all sorts of wild Pokemon. It's funny going back to the wild area now, as you can tell that it felt like a miniature test before we got something bigger like the open zones in Legends Arceus, and then the fully open world in Scarlet and Violet. Still though, it's a fun area to explore. Lots of other ideas were brought to the table here, such as the Dynamax Pokemon and curries. There are flaws here, but the majority of the game is a joy to play through, including the post-game content content and DLC packs, which I think were really well done. Also, the Galar region is one of my favourites in the Pokemon series. I may be biased as I'm from the UK, but it's nice to have this country be the inspiration for this region and its Pokemon. I especially like the Teapot Pokemon. That's a national treasure right there. Also, Wooloo is best Pokemon. New Pokemon Snap. Some of you may be surprised to see me rank this above most of the mainline games, but new Pokemon Snap is truly exceptional, and it's often forgotten about, even though long-time fans of the original have been asking for a sequel for years. The sequel is not only easily the best looking Pokemon game on Switch, as the levels and environments look absolutely beautiful, but the gameplay has been fleshed out to create a more in-depth game. When snapping photos of Pokemon, you have to try and take pictures of them when they are in 4 unique states. Sometimes Pokemon switch into a different state naturally, but other times you might need to throw fruit at them or play some music. It takes a bit of experimenting and patience to work out how to get these Pokemon into all 4 different states, but that's part of the fun in new Pokemon Snap. You also have to think about other photography things, like how far away the Pokemon is, or is it in the center of the frame. Taking these things into consideration will help to maximize the amount of points you can get for each photo you take. There's over 200 Pokemon to snap pictures of, and there's tons of gorgeous levels to go through, and each have a day and night variant. You can easily sink some serious time into this game, especially if going for 100% completion. New Pokemon Snap is a faithful revival of one of the greatest Pokemon spin-off games of all time, and I absolutely love it. Pokémon Legends ZA. This game may have only made it to 2nd place, but I still think this is one of the best Pokemon games in the entire series. That's primarily thanks to the shake-up to the battle system. It's a big theme in the game, and instead of them being turn-based, battles are now real-time. I was skeptical about this change at first, but after experiencing it, I ended up having some of the most fun I've ever had with Pokemon battles. They flow faster, feel more tense as you have to make quick decisions on the spot, and this new system feels incredibly refreshing after almost 30 years of turn-based combat in the series. I also love that Mega Evolution was brought back for this game. It is easily the best gimmick that's been done in any of the Pokemon games, and a ton of brand new Mega Pokemon have been added into the game too. Like the previous Legends game, Pokemon can be caught freely without entering a battle, and they can be caught all across the city in different wild zones. Although you can also find Pokemon to catch around the city in general, like Pidgeys can be found on lampposts, Magikarp and other fish in rivers, monkeys can be found in trees, lots of Pokemon can be found on rooftops, including some of the rarest Pokemon in the game like the Stratini, and Thomas can be found hanging out by the bins. Hopefully he's not watching this video. The story progressively gets more interesting as the game progresses, there's lots of fun characters, and the soundtrack is unbelievably godly. Like, holy smokes, Game Freak cooked up some bangers with this soundtrack. The only real negative about Legends ZA is that Lumio City was a cool idea for a setting, but poorly done in execution. I'm not talking about poor quality visuals or textures here, as that's also a problem in most of the other mainline Pokemon games on Switch. I'm talking more about the city itself, as it feels very bland and samey. Without a map, you would easily get lost here, because all the buildings and areas pretty much look the same. There's a lack of personality within this city, and that's a bit of a shame. But that's my only complaint about Legends ZA. Everything else about the game has been done to an incredibly high standard, and I really hope that Pokemon continues to move forward to create more games of real-time battles. So the game I'm deciding to declare as the champion as the best Pokemon game on Switch is Pokémon Legends Arceus. This was the first game in the series in a long time that completely changed up the Pokemon formula. Instead of routes, you now explore giant open zones. Instead of battling Pokemon to catch them, you can freely catch Pokemon without having to go into a battle or without any random encounter nonsense. Instead of standard gym battles, you fight noble Pokemon that essentially feel like boss battles. There's a ton of other great new mechanics in here too, like crafting crafting your own Pokeballs, finding alpha Pokemon, and in battles, you can switch between different styles to prioritize either your strength or speed. I really adore the setting and time period Legends Arceus took place in too. This game is set 4,000 years in the past, during a time before people and Pokemon became friends. One of the main objectives you'll be completing is to fill out the first ever Pokédex, which is a really cool concept. There's lots of goals to meet in the Pokédex relating to each Pokemon, and going through these feels very satisfying, like you have a giant list of achievements to complete. Also, while exploring the Hisui region, you will come across many aggressive Pokemon that will not only attack just your Pokemon, but also your playable character, which really makes you understand how dangerous some of these wild Pokemon can be. Along with a cool town that acts as your main base, many customizable clothes and hairstyles, a compelling narrative that can at times get pretty dark, a great soundtrack, and lots of interesting tidbits scattered across the game that expand the Pokemon lore, you get the idea that I think Legends Arceus is an incredible game. Shaking up the traditional Pokemon formula was exactly what the series needed at the time of this game releasing, and Pokemon Legends Arceus is one of the most refreshing and best Pokemon games to play. So that's every Pokemon game ranked that has currently been released on Nintendo Switch. But hold on just a second, as there's a couple of new Pokemon games that we know are coming to Switch in the future that I briefly want to talk about, and we can try to predict where these games would fit onto the list. The first is Pokémon Championship. Yes, I know it's actually Pokémon Champions. For some reason I kept referring to it as Championships when recording. My brain is really stupid. A game focused solely on Pokemon turn-based battles. You can take your Pokemon you've caught in the mainline games and transfer them over into Championship to use in battles. Championship is going to bring back and combine all the gimmicks from the previous Pokemon games too, like Mega Evolutions and Z-moves, and it will be a game that's used in official Pokemon tournaments going forward. This isn't something I'm too excited for, but this will hopefully be the best game to have traditional turn-based Pokemon battles in. If I was ranking it on the list, it would probably be slotted somewhere in the middle. A game I am way more excited about though is Pokémon Pokopia, a farming game starring Ditto. Who could have seen that coming? Ditto will be able to transform into other Pokemon and use their abilities to either harvest resources, farm, or build up cozy settlements. From the initial trailers, it looks like there's a lot of Pokemon you'll be able to transform into, so I imagine there's going to be quite a lot of depth to the game. I get a lot of Dragon Quest Builder vibes from the trailers too, which is funny as the same development team who made Builders are the ones working on this new Pokemon game, which makes me way more excited to play this when it eventually comes out. It's a Switch 2 exclusive, so I technically wouldn't include this on the list, but if I was to put it on here, I would predict that it would be within the top 5 of this list, potentially even top 3. Expect videos on this game when it comes out. In the meantime though, why don't you check out this video I did on Scarlet and Violet, where I went onto Metacritic to find some hilariously bad reviews on these games, both that are ridiculously over the top in a positive and negative way.